Hi class, today we're going to continue with photosynthesis. In this section we're going to do the Calvin cycle, which is basically part 2 of photosynthesis. So these are the 5 questions we want to try and be able to answer. Why is the Calvin cycle also called the dark reaction? Number 2, what are the reactants and products of the Calvin cycle and where does this process occur? Number 3, explain carbon fixation. Number 4, list 3 things that affect the rate of photosynthesis. And number 5, what are 2 ways that some plants regulate photosynthesis through alternative pathways? So today we're going to be looking at part 2 of photosynthesis, and this is called the Calvin cycle. On your notes packet, if you are using that, we also wrote in there dark reaction, because our last section was called the light reaction. It just so happened that a scientist named Calvin got to put his name on this section because he figured it out. So it is the dark reaction, or also known as the Calvin cycle. Another thing that you might make a note of is that it's part 2 of photosynthesis. So this process uses things from the light reaction in order to work. So it produces organic compounds, and these organic compounds are sugars, using energy from ATP and NADPH, which came from the light reaction. So these 2 things were produced in the light reaction section. ATP is just energy, and NADPH is an energy carrier. This occurs in the stroma, and the stroma is a portion of the chloroplast. It's a liquidy substance that's in the chloroplast. In this particular cycle, it is not dependent on light, so we already used the light reaction to absorb the light that was needed. It only will occur when ATP and NADPH are present, so the light reaction has to happen before this cycle can happen. And what it will do is make stored energy in the form of sugars. Carbs are just sugars. And then the plant can use those. It uses it for its own need to have energy, but also when we eat it, we're getting some of that energy as well. So how does this happen? Carbon fixation is a key thing that you need to know here, is when carbon atoms are bonded or fixed into this organic compound. Again, organic compounds are the sugars. So what happens is carbon is bonded into organic compounds. It bonds into a form that makes sugar. So this portion right here, if you're doing your notes packet, will go under the dark reaction, everything we've had up to there. This next little part, you can actually flip your page over and look at the table that was drawn for you and look at the dark reaction side and fill in these things. The reactants of the dark reaction are carbon dioxide, so this is where carbon dioxide starts getting used, and then it uses these 3 things that came from the light reaction. So the product of the light reaction ends up becoming the reactant of the dark reaction. And then the products of the dark reaction are oxygen and sugar. And that you can fill in your, if you're doing the notes packet, you can fill that in into the table that's provided for you. So you can see out of all of this, in the light reaction, we have water and sunlight, and our products are ATP, NADPH, and hydrogen, which end up getting used later. Oxygen is also a product there, and it gets sent out at that point. You can kind of see that in this image here. Water comes in, light energy in. So we have those 2 things that are reactants of the light cycle or light portion. And so that comes into the chloroplast. This entire circle here is a chloroplast. It produces these things here as well as oxygen. So these were products They then become reactants on the dark cycle. CO2 gets used here as well as a reactant in that dark cycle. Oxygen was already released, and so this portion here is released to the environment. And our Calvin cycle produces sugar. Now also in here we have a few things that get produced that get taken over to the light reaction side again, and it'll get used to help produce ATP and NADPH. Those things here will get used to do that. So this kind of is its own cycle here in the middle. If you want to draw something like that in your notes, you could. I don't have one in the notes packet, but you could draw something like that in if you like that visual. All right, so how quickly does photosynthesis happen? And so we have three main things that have been determined to affect the rate of photosynthesis. And these would make sense because it is something that has to go into photosynthesis. So the first is light intensity. And we'll notice that leaves change color about this time of year because there's less light, there's less daylight in the day. And so the chlorophyll, chloroplasts stop working as efficiently. The amount of carbon dioxide that's available, and then temperature. So two of these main ones are when the fall starts happening, fall season, temperature goes down, so chloroplasts don't work as well, and light intensity is down, which means chloroplasts don't function as well. You can see that here in this little science behind turning a new leaf. Photosynthesis will occur with chlorophyll in the chloroplast, and it will reflect this green light normally during the summer. When we see that our time changes and we have less sunlight in this section here in autumn, then it will produce less green light being reflected and more of the red and yellow lights being reflected in autumn. And it's a process that will help to save the tree. It kind of shuts down for the winter, almost like hibernating. Well, some plants just live in different environments where either there's not a lot of light or there's not enough of water. And so there's alternative pathways. And I've given you two on your sheet that you can fill in. There are some others that are in your book you can look up as you'd like. So first we need to know how the plant is made up, and the plant has these pores called stomata, and these pores on the leaves allow water in or light in, and they allow water and light out. They allow carbon dioxide in or oxygen out. And they're kind of like pores on our skin. There's two types of plants that will go through some alternative pathways that don't necessarily follow the same path of just general photosynthesis. The first is a C4 plant, and these close the stomata during hot parts of the day. They still can produce carbohydrates, but they can't lose all their water. Basically, if it's too hot, they lose their water. It's a process to maintain their water levels and keep from getting dehydrated. So a couple examples of those are corn, sugarcane, and crabgrass. And then CAM plants, C-A-M plants, they open the stomata at night and close them during the day. So they produce their organic compounds at night. And again, this is still a process to help maintain their water levels to allow the plant to continue to survive. It is just a method to maintain homeostasis for that plant. Some examples are cactuses and pineapples. And this is what a stomata would look like, just a pore on the leaf. Okay, and that is the end of notes today. You can kind of review over some of the things we've done by looking at these quiz questions and just see how you would do. Would you be able to use your notes? Did you write your notes well enough to be able to answer these, or could you answer them without using your notes?